Good evening and welcome to Wofford College. I'm Nate Samhat, president of the college, and I'm pleased. Well, the vice president was calling me Mr. President a little earlier, so you kind of get used to it after a while. I'm pleased that you're here joining us this evening for the Hipp Lecture Series on International Affairs and National Security. Our speaker this evening is Mike Pence, the 48th President of these United States. Wife? Oh, okay. Well, let me carry on. Wofford College, like colleges and universities across our nation, is committed to academic freedom in the widest possible sense, which is consistent with the values articulated in the Chicago Principles, as well as our own mission and core values. We have invited speakers from across the spectrum of perspectives on contemporary issues to come to our campus. And the Hipp Lecture Series is part of what makes this a dynamic place where thoughts are discussed and interrogated. For providing these opportunities, I'd like to thank Van Hipp, Wofford class of 1982, who will be our moderator this evening. Van is chairman of American Defense International, although many of you may know him as our illustrious sideline commentator during Terrier football games. We're always happy to welcome Van to Wofford College in whatever capacity, and I welcome him to the stage now. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks, President Samhat, for those kind words, and great to be with you tonight. What a crowd. I mean, it's great to see this place full tonight with Terrier fans. What a crowd. And I want to thank each one of you for being here tonight. We are honored tonight to have a man who has served this nation with distinction. Distinction as a member of the United States House of Representatives, a governor, and as the Vice President of the United States. He's also a graduate of a small liberal arts college, not a Methodist college, but a Presbyterian college, Hanover College in Indiana, and also a graduate of Indiana University School of Law. As a member of the United States Congress for 12 years, he was a champion of fiscal responsibility and of America living within its means. He was a pioneer on the need to have meaningful immigration reform for this country and securing America's borders. He was a man before his time on so many of those critical issues. In fact, in 2008, Esquire magazine named him one of the 10 best members of the entire United States Congress because he always put principle above party. As governor of Indiana, he enacted the largest tax cut in Indiana history, and he left the people of Indiana with a $2 billion surplus and a AAA credit rating. As Vice President of the United States, he chaired the National Space Council and led America's effort on the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also an author of the upcoming book, So Help Me God. It'll be out on November 15th. I'm looking forward to reading it, and I urge you before you leave tonight, take out your phone and pre-order a copy. Throughout his public life, Mike Pence has been known as a man who does what he believes is to be right, regardless of the political consequences. Winston Churchill once said, "The difference between a politician and a statesman is that the politician thinks about the next election. The statesman thinks about the next generation." Please join me in giving a South Carolina welcome to a patriot and an American statesman, the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Well, hello, South Carolina. It is wonderful to be with you all. And Van Hipp, I am deeply humbled by your overly kind introduction. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership here at this great institution. Van knows me well enough to know the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. And it is my honor to be on the campus of Wofford College, the Harvard of the South. Thank you all for joining us for this Hipp Lecture Series on international affairs. I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts about the state of the world. But to see this wonderful crowd out of students and so many distinguished alum means a great deal to me. I want to thank you, Mr. President, for the warm welcome today. I want to thank members of the Board of Trustees, including your chair, Chris Carpenter. I also want to thank a great friend of mine and a great public servant here in South Carolina who has been a great encouragement. He's here with his wife, Lilia, but Senator Josh Kimbrell, thank you so much for making the trip from the state capitol to be with us here tonight. And thank you for your great service to this community. You can give them all a round of applause. You know, Wofford College is a special place. 168 years since before the Civil War. Thousands of young Americans have come here to learn, to prepare for life's great adventure. But what's unique about this place is it's committed to citizenship, training up leaders, and this lecture series is all about that. And so I'm really humbled and honored to have the opportunity to be here. And Van Hipp, to thank you for making it possible for the training of a new generation of leaders. And I'm honored to be a small part of that continuing legacy here. You know, my life has changed a lot since the last time we were together. I moved home to Indiana, bought 5 acres and a pond, got a riding mower, John Deere, 54-inch deck, 0-turn radius, 25 horsepower. I can tell you're a little bit jealous. Mrs. Pence and I became grandparents for the very first time, which people in the room with hair the same color of mine will appreciate more than the rest of you. But maybe most important of all, going back home to Indiana and then spending much of the last year and a half traveling around the state of the United States has been a very rich time in our life. You know, I spent 20 years in public office. As Van shared with you, I served 12 years in the Congress of the United States. And all of those years, I was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I literally traveled the world. I was governor of the state of Indiana, vice president. But while our plans for these 4 years was different, the opportunity to be across the country, to be meeting with men and women from every walk of life has convinced me more than ever that while these are challenging times in the life of our nation, inflation at a 40-year high, gas prices through the roof, a crisis at our border like none we've ever seen in our history, a national debt piling up, I'm absolutely convinced that help is on the way, and we are 3 weeks away from a great American comeback. I promise you. You know, and I think that the change is going to come for 2 reasons: their record and our record. I didn't come here tonight to talk so much about the current administration and their policies, but I'll speak about the policies and the errors of the administration on the foreign stage momentarily. But I do believe the reason why change is coming, and it'll come decisively soon here in South Carolina and all across this country, is because the American people look at the record that we created during the Trump-Pence administration. An administration that rebuilt our military, revived our economy through tax cuts and regulatory reform, unleashed American energy, saw 300 conservatives appointed to our courts at every level. I mean, in 48 short months of our administration, particularly the 3 years before the worst pandemic in 100 years, Trump-Pence administration achieved a stronger, more prosperous America, the lowest unemployment, the highest household income, the most energy production, the most pro-American trade deal, the most secure border, and we made the strongest military in the history of the world stronger than ever before. 7 million good-paying jobs. And we became a net exporter of energy for the first time in 70 years. We reduced illegal immigration by 90%. We held China accountable at last for years of trade abuses and human rights abuses. And with 3 appointments to the Supreme Court of the United States. This summer, a majority of justices on the Supreme Court sent Roe versus Wade to the ash heap of history where it belongs and gave America a new beginning for life. You know, today I heard that President Biden made a pledge that if Democrats were to hold on to the House and to the Senate, that on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, come this January, that he would sign a bill codifying that decision into law. But I've got news for President Biden. Come January 22nd, we will have pro-life majorities in the House and Senate, and we'll be taking the cause of the right to life to every state house in America. So it's been our record that I think will set the table for the change that's coming. But I'm very moved by what Van said. I don't know that I fill the bill, but I do believe that this is a time when we shouldn't just be thinking about the next election. We should, all of us as Americans, be thinking about the next generation. Because we live in a very uncertain time in the world, a time when the adversaries of freedom have been emboldened, perhaps as never before in my lifetime. And I want to speak to that. You know, to provide for the common defense is the first obligation of the national government under the Constitution of the United States. And I'm proud to say, as the father of a United States Marine captain and able to count one of my unworthy son-in-laws as a lieutenant in the United States Navy, that our administration made an investment, the likes of which in our military hadn't been made since the days of Ronald Reagan. $3 trillion in defense spending, including a record $740 billion for the year 2021. We secured a $400 billion increase also among our allies and partners in NATO. And we created the 6th branch of our armed forces, a first for more than 3/4 of a century, with the launch of the United States Space Force. Under our administration, we projected American strength to the world. And we weren't afraid to use American strength to prosecute our interests or defend our interests around the world as well. We stood up to our enemies and we stood with our allies as never before. The armed forces of the United States, with that renewed American strength, destroyed the ISIS caliphate, took down their leader without one American casualty, and the most dangerous terrorist in the world, Qasem Soleimani, is gone. It was an extraordinary achievement by our armed forces, and one that I actually spent hours in the Situation Room watching unfold in real time. And the heroism of our troops and the men and women wearing uniform cannot be overstated, and made America more secure. We not only stood up to our enemies, but we stood with our allies as never before. We marshaled those resources among our allies to contribute from the Asia Pacific to the European theater to our common defense as never before in my lifetime. And if the world knew nothing else, the world knew this. Under the Trump-Pence administration, America stood with Israel. We acknowledged Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. We withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. And our administration did what 4 successive administrations, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, had promised to do but did not do when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. It's an extraordinary statement. I was there in the Oval Office when those debates were going on, literally one world leader after another calling the president to talk him out of keeping his word to the American people and to our most cherished ally. There were pledges that it would unleash the whirlwind in the Middle East, that there would be all new and renewed violence. But there's something about strength and clarity of the American position that actually invites peace. Peace comes through strength. And we proved that in the fall of 2020, when for the first time in 25 years, not one but two Arab nations recognized Israel's right to exist and normalize diplomatic relations in the Abraham Accords. But as we gather here today for this lecture series on international affairs and national security, after years of American strength, after years when the enemies of freedom in the world were quiet, things have changed. I mean, we seem to have an administration in Washington, D.C. that's intent on weakening America at home and abroad almost every day. And the messages that they're sending to the wider world are emboldening our adversaries. I mean, the recent actions of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea are just the latest tragic reminder of an undeniable truth of history, that weakness arouses evil, but peace comes through strength. You know, I can't help but still grieve for the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that took place a year ago, August. I mean, not just the 13 service members that fell at the Kabul airport that day, but to see the full-on retreat, people clinging to aircraft as American military were scrambling to leave that country's capital as the Taliban descended on Kabul. I will tell all of you that it never had to happen. I mean, the peace deal that we had negotiated with Taliban required that they would never use force against any American military personnel, that they would keep their word to the Afghan national government to negotiate an agreement, and that they would never harbor terrorists. And the fact that when the Taliban moved on Mazar al-Sharif to the north and nothing happened, it only emboldened them to charge forward. And you saw the Afghan National Army and the government in Afghanistan collapse. The tragedy that took place at that airport, claiming the lives of some extraordinary Americans in uniform, was a tragedy. That being said, let me say, knowing that there are veterans in the room here today, nothing of that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan will ever diminish the service and sacrifice of the men and women who served in Afghanistan defending our freedom over the last 20 years. God bless them all. But the truth is today that withdrawal from Afghanistan has unleashed a message of weakness on the world stage. So today I want to discuss how America can make the world more peaceful by projecting greater strength. Plain and simple. First and foremost, as you may have read in the Wall Street Journal today, Heritage Foundation released a useful study earlier this morning that showed that our defense spending has actually been flatlined. After years where our administration was catching up on defense spending, now we see an administration spending trillions of dollars at home, advancing their own agenda, piling on trillions of dollars on debt on this generation, and yet at the same time, flatlining our investment in our national defense. First and foremost, men and women, we need to call on a new Congress in Capitol Hill to meet that first obligation of the national government and give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, and Coast Guard the resources they need to accomplish their mission and defend this nation. Number one. Secondly, we need to understand the strength of this country really comes from three sources throughout our history: our faith, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. Since the outset of this administration, we've seen American natural resources and our energy resources stifled under the weight of a left-wing climate agenda. For American strength to return, for freedom-loving nations around the world to not be dependent on the adversaries of freedom for their energy needs. We need to unleash American energy and once again become a net exporter of energy to the world. I mean, it's remarkable to think about it, that after years when energy independence was just a dream, a pipe dream of Americans, in 3 short years under our administration, we were actually a net energy exporter, and net energy imports fell to their lowest level in 60 years. But now under this administration, we see the price of gasoline crushing family budgets and businesses. This year, it's heartbreaking to think that the average American family will spend another $1,500 a year on gasoline. I was at an event in Hobart, Indiana, with a congressional candidate not long ago, Jennifer Ruth Green, and we had all the Chicago media gathered around us in Northeast Indiana. We were at a gas station pumping gas. We literally were working with a group that had bought down the gasoline at that station for the day to the price it was when the Trump-Pence administration left office, $2.38. You can imagine the cars were lined down the street. So I was pumping gas, which was something I used to do when I was about your age for a living. And a woman pulled in her car, 2 little children in the back seat, nicely appointed car, but I said to her, "Tell me what these gasoline prices are doing to your family budget." She said, "Well, you know, I'm home with the kids right now. My husband works, so," she said, "We've been having to go to the food bank locally here in Hobart twice a week." I looked at her and said, "You've been having to go to the food bank?" She said, "Yeah, she said, "You know, our gasoline budget is basically what our grocery budget comes out of. And gasoline prices roughly doubled. We just have to find it somewhere. So we go into the food banks." I mean, the truth of the matter is that this administration has said that the gasoline prices are rising because of the war in Ukraine, but gasoline prices have gone up 50% before the first shot was fired in Ukraine. I mean, gasoline prices have not risen because of the war in Ukraine. They've risen because of the war on energy, and we have got to bring that war on American energy to an end. So as we renew our strength, our commitment to our national defense, as we renew our resources that we will depend on and our allies will depend on, finally, we just simply need to stand strong against those who would threaten our freedom and freedom-loving people around the world. You know, the world watches every move an American president makes. And there's only one person responsible for the mindless violence and unprovoked war in Ukraine, and that's Vladimir Putin. And Putin must be held to account. But I will say to all the young people gathered here and all the alumni, that said, I believe it's no coincidence that our administration, the Trump-Pence administration, was the only administration in the 21st century where Russia did not attempt to redraw international lines by force. Now, why is that? I said before, because we made a commitment to our national defense and we were willing to use our military to prosecute our interests, whether it be in ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Qasem Soleimani. And Putin knows that. I met Vladimir Putin in Singapore about halfway through our administration. I stood toe-to-toe with him and I told him things that he didn't want to hear. And I will tell you, Putin only understands strength. So we need to meet this moment with the freedom-loving people in Ukraine with American strength. We need to continue to provide the people of Ukraine with the ability and resources to defend themselves. We need to continue to sanction Russia until they withdraw from Ukraine, and we need to flow humanitarian aid to the people of Ukraine. Freedom can win if we will stand with those who stand for freedom. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. But I want you to know that what's happening in Ukraine and Eastern Europe could have implications far beyond Eastern Europe. I know there are those that would have us pull back as a nation. And that impulse has always existed in America. But the truth is, I promise you, countries like North Korea and China are watching very closely what happens in Eastern Europe. And any sign of weakness by America or the West today may very well arouse even greater evil in the Asia-Pacific tomorrow. John Quincy Adams said, America must never, quote, go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. But we must always recognize that we are the arsenal of democracy. And we will always stand with those who stand for freedom. But even as our nation faces these historic challenges, particularly around the world and here at home, I want you all to know that I'm confident of better things, confident of better days to come. Some of you that are approaching graduation may be a little bit nervous about the economy you're coming into. But I promise you, we're going to get it all back, and then some. The truth of the matter is, the only advantage that we have over the last 2 years is we've gotten a full-throated dose of everything the American left has had to offer. Higher taxes, more government, less national security, a trampling on our liberties and our values. And everywhere I go, I hear Americans saying, we get it, we're ready, and change is coming. But I'm also very confident because I see this new generation coming up. I like to call you all the freedom generation. I got 3 members of my family that are part of it. I mean, you got to understand, those of us with a few more miles on the odometer grew up in a little bit different America than you. When we heard a song on the radio that we liked, we'd maybe write down a note of what the title was, and then we'd go down to the record store, see if they had that record in. Now, good heavens, the world you all live in today, you hear a song that you like, you just hold your phone up to the radio, it'll buy it right on the spot. I mean, you have the world literally at your fingertips. And I believe you've gotten a full dose of freedom from very early in your life. And I know that this generation is going to stand for freedom and on the ramparts of freedom for many years to come. But I want to close with a challenge specifically to the students who join us here today. I want to challenge you to make a lifelong commitment to become men and women of integrity. You're incredibly blessed to be going to an institution like Wofford College. Foundation that's being poured in your life academically, but also the obligation that you have to give back to your community that resonates in all the hallways of this place and has for 168 years. Will serve you well. I know there are men and women who are seated in this auditorium who will serve in public office someday at the local, state, or federal level. More importantly, I know there are men and women in this room that will put on a uniform someday, maybe of a first responder, public safety, or maybe the uniform of the United States. And so I want to challenge you with a perception that I think is afoot in our society today, and challenge you to develop those character qualities that we'll need in the leaders that you'll become. You know, there's a common misperception, I believe, afoot that adversity creates character. Now, the way my kids put it is they say, well, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Well, I have a different view. Whatever doesn't kill you just didn't kill you. And the truth is, adversity doesn't create character. Adversity reveals character. When your time of testing comes, and it does for all of us, you will be in that moment the man or woman you have been preparing to be in every quiet moment before. And so I want to say to all of you who aspire to leadership, use this time in your life to develop the qualities of the inner man and the inner woman that will prepare you to be the leaders this country needs, the servants that this country needs. Whether you simply lead families or you help lead communities or you help lead our nation, grow in those qualities in your life. As the old book says, grow in wisdom and in stature and grace before God and grace before men. And never forget, your generation may well be the last line of defense for the Constitution of the United States. You know, for most of our history, both political parties have been committed to the ideals enshrined in our founding documents. We've celebrated them universally in America. But I don't need to tell college students that we live in a time when many routinely demean the American founding. Many on the left seek to rewrite our Constitution, erase aspects of the Bill of Rights, our First Amendment, our Second Amendment, cancel free speech, redefine our liberties. So you must become men and women who will stand firm. As George Washington said, the Constitution is the guide I will never abandon. And so you must become. Because you may not know that every office holder in America takes the same oath. Everyone that puts on a uniform takes the same oath. When my son raised his right hand to become a United States Marine, he said almost the same things I've said on that platform in January of 2017. To support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it ended with a prayer. So help me God. I took the oath on Ronald Reagan's Bible and one of my own. And I say to this rising generation, all of you have come to appreciate the extraordinary foundation that's been poured in that Constitution, in its vision of limited government and liberties, and the way that it's created hope for the entire world. The American people have to know that you too will be leaders who keep your oath, even when it would be politically expedient to do otherwise. The Bible says in Psalm 15, he keeps his oath even when it hurts. And so you must be such men and women. Because as I said, you'll take that oath, not just to the people that you serve, but you'll end it with a prayer. So help me God. And there I'll leave you. You know, my ultimate source of confidence about the future of this country and its ability to be a hope and inspiration to the world comes from my faith in the American people. My belief that the foundation of America is freedom, but my conviction that the foundation of freedom is faith. And that it has been the faith of the American people that has seen us through much more challenging times than we could any of us imagine, and will see us through these times. And that if we will but dedicate ourselves to become leaders who keep our word to Him and to the people we aspire to serve, I know the best days for South Carolina and America are yet to come. So thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here at Wofford College. And God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Now we have some Wofford College students with some questions to ask you. They come up. We've got Dylan Peters first. Dylan, come on up. And what year are you? Where are you from?
I am a sophomore here at Wofford, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina.
What's your name, Bill?
Dylan Peters.
Oh, Dylan, hi. I'm Mike.
Nice to meet you. My all of the vice presidents who came before you, who do you most look up to and why?
Well, in my office, at the White House, Dylan, I had four portraits. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, who happened to be the third and the second vice presidents. And I also had a portrait of Calvin Coolidge and Teddy Roosevelt, who were a little bit different. I'll leave it to the history students in the room to explain that later. But I also had a portrait of Abraham Lincoln over the fireplace that I borrowed from the Commonwealth Club in Philadelphia. You wouldn't necessarily know, but Abraham Lincoln grew up in Indiana. And I always like to remind people of that. Moved there when he was 7, moved away when he was 23. Where would you say you grew up? But for me, when I think back about my 47 predecessors, I will tell you, I deeply admired John and Abigail Adams. If you have not yet spent time to read about that incredible, courageous American couple, you should. You should understand them. Abigail Adams was an extraordinary patriot who took incredible risks and was a thought leader in her own time and her own right. But I will tell you, I remember being asked in the campaign in 2016 who I might identify with, and people immediately thought it'd be an Indiana vice president named Dan Quayle, who is to this day a very dear friend of mine and was a great vice president. But my thoughts immediately went to George Herbert Walker Bush. I've met President Bush many times. I met him once when he was vice president back in 1988. And I thought he and I might have a lot in common. He was someone that came up through a career in public service, and he became vice president to an outsider who came to Washington, D.C. to shake things up. Sound familiar? So I was greatly inspired by him and by his example, and I told him so several times before he left us. He was a remarkable man and a great vice president, and it was a great inspiration to me. Thanks, Dylan.
Next, we've got Sam Smith. And Sam, what year are you and where are you from?
I'm a senior here at Wofford College. I'm in Florence, South Carolina.
Oh, great.
And my
Thanks,
question
Sam.
today is, to what extent do you believe there is a division between the so-called MAGA Republicans and the established Republicans? And how can we go about rectifying that division to achieve greater electoral success in 2022 and 2024? Thank you.
Well, give me a call in 3 weeks and see if you see much division. Because I think, I understand many in the media want to emphasize division always. But I see people coming together. Good, spirited, competitive primaries around the country. That's what we have. You have them here in South Carolina. We have them here in Indiana as well. But what I see is unity. And it's unity on a conservative platform. I'm going to speak tomorrow in Washington, D.C. at a couple of events. But one of which I'm going to talk about that agenda. We call it the Freedom Agenda. A foundation I created in Washington, D.C. literally got together cabinet officials and former officials from the Trump-Pence administration. We asked the question, what were the ideas that animated this movement from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump? And we put them all in one place. You can get on your phone and go to Advancing American Freedom and read it for yourself. It's a fairly short document. But I think it's those ideas that have united and will continue to unite this movement. I'm actually very optimistic that unity is already happening. Check in with me in about 3 weeks and see if you don't see it all over the country. Okay? Thanks, Sam. Great question.
Next, we have Judson Stewart. Judson, where you from and what year?
I was vice president.
Hey, man.
Sophomore year at Wofford and Charlotte, North Carolina.
What's your first name again?
Judson.
Justin, thanks.
Yes, sir. Anyways, I just wanted to ask you, what are 3 tangible things you think that we can do as a country to help better our understanding of each other's opposing political positions?
Well, first is remember that God gave you 2 of these and 1 of these. Is that fair? You know, I'm somebody that believes that democracy is dependent on heavy doses of civility. I mean, throughout my public career in the last 20 years, I've tried to manifest that. I've tried to treat others the way that I want to be treated. Doesn't mean I don't like a good debate. I love a good debate. People will tell you on the floor of the Congress or on cable television, I like to mix it up. But you know, there's a difference between saying that you've got bad ideas, which you probably do, and saying you're a bad person, right? I mean, if I say you got bad ideas, then it's your turn. You tell me why I got bad ideas, right? If I say you're a bad person, then maybe we aren't going to be able to talk much and find places that we can get common ground. And so I will tell you, I mean, and it wasn't always that way for me. I'll be transparent with you. In that book that Van mentioned that's coming out, I talk about my early political career. I ran for office a couple of times when Ronald Reagan was still in the White House. And I got caught up in some pretty rough and tumble politics. Now, I had come to faith in Jesus Christ when I was in college and tried to live out my life every day in faith to him as my Lord and Savior. But when I got caught up in politics at age 29, I kind of set that aside a little bit. Kind of said the golden rule applies unless you're in a really tough campaign, right? It's more like in politics, it's do unto others before they do unto you, right? And I ended up getting to the end of that campaign, Justin, and I write about this in my book. I wrote an essay, had a lot of regrets after 2 years, 2 failed campaigns. I wrote an essay entitled Confessions of a Negative Campaigner, in which I said that I'd failed to live up to the standard that I knew was the standard of the audience of one that I served. And so I said campaigns ought to be about 3 things. Number 1, they ought to be about demonstrating the basic human decency of the candidate. You ought to treat others the way you want to be treated. Number 2, they ought to be about issues more important than your election. You ought to be willing to talk about bigger issues in the life of the nation, whether or not it serves your immediate short-term interest. And lastly, then elections can be about winning. And I will tell you, when I had the opportunity to be elected to Congress 10 years later, I went to Congress, and Van was generous about his description of my career there. I actually forged really good relationships with some really liberal members of Congress who I agreed with on nothing. I mean, zip, empty zip. But we respected each other because I could sense their sincerity, they could sense mine, and we occasionally found ways to work together. So I honestly think in this time when our politics is very divided, I'm not sure America's as divided as our politics are, but our politics are very divided. I hope to be a voice for showing that you can disagree without being disagreeable. You can take strong stands, but you can show respect for every American. And we go back to that. We're going to find our way forward together. I believe it with all my heart.
And next we have Hal Crosswell.
Is it Hal?
Hal. And Hal, what year and where are you from?
I'm a senior here, and I'm
Great.
from Columbia, South Carolina.
Great.
My question is, and you touched on this in the end of your speech, but is there any concern that an increasing lack of civic knowledge nationwide, such as in understanding the Constitution and the nation's founding, that can lead to a more and more fragile democracy?
I mentioned John Adams earlier. John Adams had a quote at the time of the American founding. He said, our nation, our Constitution, he said, was created for a deeply moral people, and it's wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. into education of the American public, and education in what's made America unique among all the nations in the world is absolutely essential to the survival of liberty and the survival of the republic. One of the reasons why we established a 1776 commission during the Trump-Pence administration. We wanted to bring back education. I think patriotic education is essential to the survival of liberty. And I'm not talking about ignoring what we've learned in the past. I mean, we were not a perfect union when we were created, but we made it clear that we would always work to be a more perfect union. And we have. One of those Democrats that I agreed with on nothing, but he was a good man, was the late John Lewis, who was one of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s chief lieutenants. He came to national fame when he was beaten almost to death on Bloody Sunday. But that gave rise to the Civil Rights Act of 1965. But I remember he asked me to co-lead the pilgrimage. If you can imagine this cheerful conservative and John Lewis leading the pilgrimage to Selma, Alabama, walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge together. But I'll never forget the night that John was speaking. We were at Dr. King's church over in Montgomery. And several people got up and were talking about everything that's got to happen and everything that's got to change. And they're every right to do that. But John got up and said, look, and he said it in many other venues. He said, we do a disservice if we don't recognize how far we've come. And he was just talking about the civil rights movement. But I think for the survival of our nation, it's absolutely essential that we train up our children in what's made this country unique. Because I got a newsflash for you. If you think we're smarter or better than other people in the world, other than our Native American fellow citizens, we are other people in the world, right? I mean, there's nothing about what it is to be ethnically American. It's our system. It's our system of government, the principles, the Constitution, the liberties enshrined in the Bill of Rights, the ideals expressed in the Declaration. That's what's given rise to the freest, most prosperous, most powerful nation in the history of the world. And if we are going to sustain that, this generation needs to understand and appreciate it and communicate what it is that's made America special. And that begins with the Constitution and the principles at the heart of our nation. So we'll get after it and we'll get it done.
And next we have Kayla Southwood. Okay, where are you from and what year are you?
Hello, I'm from Charlotte, and I'm a freshman here.
Great.
And you mentioned you like to mix things up with debate, so here's my question. Some might argue that rewriting aspects of the Constitution so that it's modernized but still retains the same values is an important principle to exercise, especially since it was made to be constructed to be a living document. How would you respond to this?
Rewriting.
Changing some aspects of the Constitution so that it's modernized, but retains the same values.
Well, look, we have an amendment process that the Constitution contemplates. And the Constitution has been amended many times. And I, as an American, I accept that. What I don't accept is rewriting the Constitution in the courts. What I don't accept is efforts to pack the court, as many on the American left have sought to do, is literally add seats on the court so they'd have different outcomes because of the disappointment with recent decisions. We have an orderly process in the Constitution for bringing about change. And I would submit to you that that the recent decision, I know there's strong different views on either side. I'm pro-life, I don't apologize for it. But I mean, I think rightly understood, the Roe versus Wade decision 49 years ago was the Supreme Court reaching into the purview of state legislatures and effectively creating a right that wasn't specifically expressed in the Constitution of the United States. They essentially rewrote the Constitution. And what you saw a court do in the Dobbs decision was essentially pull that back and return that question to the states and the American people. I think for an orderly society, for us to move forward as a nation, we're best served when we respect the political processes, the will of the American people, including when the American people decide to amend the Constitution, then they decide to amend it, not unelected judges on a court who decide to find new things in the Constitution that the founders never put there. So I think that's how you do change in a free society, in a constitutional republic.
Thank you.
We've got Woodswood Woods. And I know where you're from, Lexington, South Carolina.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
You bet, thank you.
A couple of weeks ago, as a part of the Hipp Lecture Series, the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Rogers, spoke of the United States needing a realignment in order to keep up with our adversaries on the world stage. My question is, do you believe this to be true, and what can we do as college students to ensure this happens?
Well, Congressman Rogers is a great friend and a great tribute that he came here, not surprisingly to Wofford. Now, did he speak specifically about intelligence, the intelligence community, or national defense overall?
He spoke intelligence, national community, around areas, China, Russia, North Korea.
Yeah, look, I think one of the great contributions of the Trump-Pence administration was we changed the national consensus on China. And frankly, I learned all along with every American about what's really happening in Beijing. I mean, there was this belief 20 years ago that if we continue to have economic and cultural exchange with China, we continue to see the Chinese economy grow and expand, that you would see liberties grow up, religious liberty, freedom of speech, private property in that communist country. But the truth is, the opposite has happened. And under our administration, we brought all that to light. The trade abuses, intellectual property theft happening in the literally billions of dollars on an annual basis, the aggressive military maneuvers in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. What we've seen is an increasingly militaristic and increasingly repressive China. I mean, rounding up Muslim Uyghurs into what amount to concentration camps in Western China, all give evidence of the fact that we need to understand that China is in fact the greatest threat to our prosperity and security in the 21st century, and we do need to realign our focus on China, on its activities in the Asia Pacific. But at the same time, I will tell you, the fact that Russia continues to prosecute this unconscionable war, using drones last night to bomb civilian targets in Kiev, killing men, women, and children wantonly, tells us that we've got to be able to look both ways in the world. We've got to be able to look to the Far East, and we've got to be able to look to the West, and we've got to defend our interests. And so I think the reality is that after the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were people that thought that we were going to have a holiday from history. And for a time, it seemed like we did, but it was only because of American strength. With the wavering message coming out of Washington, D.C., with the flagging commitment to our national defense, you're seeing this increased aggression by adversaries of freedom in the world. And that's why I said tonight the only antidote is American strength and renewed focus.
Thank you very much.
Good question.
Next, we have Katie Kerr. Katie? And what year are you and where are you from?
Hi, thank you so much for speaking at Wofford this evening. I'm a sophomore from Greenville, South Carolina. And it's an honor to be able to ask you a question, so thank you.
Is it Kate?
Yes, sir, Katie.
Good, got it.
College students are constantly shaped by the unique environments they place themselves in. As Mr. Hipp stated earlier, you attended Hanover College, a small private liberal arts institution in Indiana. Wofford College is also a small private liberal arts institution. How did attending a small college with an emphasis in the liberal arts impact your political upbringing, and how did you explore your interest in the government as a student in college?
Well, Kate, I think it's a great question, and I will say again, congratulations on getting into Wofford. It's a highly competitive institution, and you're fortunate to be here. You got to be a great student. I, on the other hand, was not. Actually, I had too much fun in high school, to be quite honest with you. And all of my family members all went to Indiana University, big university, great. Used to have great basketball program. But when I was graduating from high school, I had discovered that I had a bit of the gift of the gab, as my Irish immigrant grandfather would call it. But I've really felt a deep conviction about learning and about understanding. I took a degree in American history. I felt a calling to public service, but I knew coming out of high school that I didn't really have an appreciation for America, for the history of the country. And I thought I'd have a better opportunity, which I believe I did, in a smaller college setting, somewhere where I could be challenged. You know, I don't want to say if you go to a big university, you can hide, but you can a little bit. You can't hide here at Wofford. I couldn't hide at the little liberal arts college that I attended. In that book I just wrote, one of the people that's featured very prominently in the early chapters is a college professor who had no tolerance for my sloppy thinking. He just challenged me like your professors challenge you here at Wofford. All right, and so it had a huge impact on me. It really did. I would go on to study at a university, and I have great regard for both my alma maters. But I do believe that, for me at least, you were already a good student because that's how you got in here. But for me at least, taking that time in my life, I had learned early on that I had the ability to say things reasonably well. It's a God-given ability. But I knew I had to find something to say. And I just think for each and every one of you that taking this moment in your lives to really go deep, learn what you believe, talk to people who will challenge you about what your beliefs are, study and understand the underpinnings of the American experiment. And your life will be better and richer, far beyond anything you can imagine. And South Carolina and America will be as well. So, great question. Thank you. Great question.
I think these Wofford students for their questions have made the job easier for the press in the back of the room. Let's give these students a hand. I want to thank all of y'all for being here tonight. Mr. Vice President, especially want to thank you. I want to thank you for your service to this nation and your example of statesmanship. Let's give the Vice President another round of applause.